Hello again, and welcome back to another episode. Today we're looking at another 35mm SLRs, bit of a theme going on the channel. I do cover rangefinders and TLRs as well, and medium format. But I thought this one might prove interesting. It's branded Exakta, and this is the Exakta FE2000. Now Exakta was a brand name of a company called Ihagi, which was a German camera manufacturer prior to the war, the Second World War, and it continued after the Second World War. But Germany was split into two. There was East Germany and West Germany. The East German Exaktas, made by East German Ihagi, who eventually were incorporated into Pentagon. So that kind of disappeared into Pentagon. However, in the 60s, there was another company in the West German area called Ihagi West. This didn't last very long, this company. It went bust in the mid-70s, so this camera is early to mid-70s. I couldn't find an exact date of when this was launched. Only available in black. There was no chrome versions, and it was the last camera sold by West Germany's Ihagi West. So that was the end of that company. Now the Exakta name has been on a few cameras. It was the West German Ihagi that made the Exakta 66, which is kind of related to the Pentagon 6. So there was still some sort of cooperation going on between the two sort of sides. However, 35mm single lens reflex. It had a mechanical shutter. It does take a battery that goes underneath this cover here. It should be a mercury cell, so you can use a wean cell. Just takes the one. That's just to power the meter, but it also offers shutter speed priority automation. However, not with this lens. This lens is the wrong lens. It's not the right lens. It should be matched to the camera. So you would select the shutter speed, and the camera would then set the aperture on the lens corresponding to give you a good exposure. You'd also have to put in the ISO, which is the usual lift up and twist dial at the top here. So it had a degree of automation. In the very early days of automation in cameras, you had to choose whether you preferred shutter priority automation or aperture priority automation. You didn't get both, let alone program. Those came along later. So before you even bought your camera, you had to decide which one you want. And the reason that a shutter priority came along first is because you can use a mechanical shutter. There weren't electronically controlled shutters available at the time. So this one relies on gears and cogs inside for the shutter. The lens mount is an M42. It's the common, often referred to as Pentax screw mount. So you literally unscrew anti-clockwise and off comes the lens. And if you've seen any videos before, this will look familiar to you. It has the pin that activates the aperture, so you can compose with the lens wide open, and then it will stop down when you take the actual picture. Now, as an extra, what they did is they put this extra little button here, and when that's depressed, if the lens is set to EE, there's a lever, you can just about make it out up here, that would set the aperture on the lens, and then the usual little bar at the bottom would stop the lens down. So in fact you had open aperture, wide open metering, and even in the stop down mode you can still meter with it wide open, but you have to manually set the aperture on the lens yourself. Quite an interesting design. Has a self timer on the front, which again is clockwork, quite stiff. About 10 seconds, I think, pretty much standard, is selfie mode. There you go. You can see on this side there's an exposure scale with aperture readings on it, and that's linked by the meter. It tells you what aperture it's thinking you should be using. If you've got the right lens, it will set it. If you're using one of these not correct lenses, you have to set it manually. But yeah, it's quite interesting. Adaptation of the M42 mount. So battery, self-timer, lens mount. There is a stop-down lever for depth of field preview. A couple of lug straps. On the top, you've got a frame counter, additive type, so it increases every time you take a shot. Cocking lever. It also turns the meter on, so don't wind on until you want to take a picture. If you wind on and leave it, it will continue to drain the battery. Threaded shutter release. I've had this before with this camera where it does tend to play up a little bit. It's not the most reliable of things. It probably needs a bit of TLC or a bit of using, to be honest. And there again, it doesn't want to wind on afterwards until you move this lever, and then it will wind on. Yeah, something a little bit wrong inside of there. So shutter speed selector, 1/1000th down to 1 second. It's got an X speed at a 60th. I think the 15th is probably for bulbs. People don't really use bulbs. Hot shoe on the top. A Japanese past sticker, which seems a bit strange, on a German camera. Rewind crank, pretty standard, but you don't pull it up to open the back. You open it up in the old-fashioned way with a latch on the side at the back here. Flash connector there, PC cable flash connector. Here's the film area. This is metal, quite nicely constructed actually. So here's the pressure plate, take-up spool, the driving sort of system for the film. And you can see there a horizontal cloth shutter, and this is obviously where your fresh film sits inside of there. On the bottom, we have the rewind push-in button on the bottom to rewind the film when you're finished, a tripod bush, and hang on a minute, it says made in Japan. So although this is from a West German camera company, it's made in Japan. That's a bit strange. I wonder who made it. Well, a simple answer to that is Petrie made them. And that's probably the reason why it's got a Petrie lens on it. This has got the Petrie 55 1.8. And this is made in Japan as well. It's a CC Auto. All that means is it's got an automatic diaphragm. So that when you push this pin in, it will stop down to the selected aperture. There you go. And in common with a lot of these lenses, it has a manual and an auto switch. That's in the auto position, and you can switch it over to the manual position, in which case it's stopped down. Glass could do with a clean, but it looks in reasonable condition, to be fair. Quite a rare camera. I was looking at the prices on, what was it, Collector Blend or something, and they're saying these are worth about $600 or $700. I wouldn't recommend spending that on one of these. They're interesting, they're rare, they're quite collectible, but they're not really an Exakta. It's a Petrie manufactured clone camera. Unfortunately, like I say, the Hagi West went bankrupt in the mid to late 70s. They couldn't compete. They obviously couldn't compete if they were basically selling rebranded Petries. But yeah, an interesting camera. Nice one for the collection. It does work, the meter works and everything. It's just trying to find the right lens for it. But there you go, folks. That's the video for today. Hope you found it interesting. Comments, questions, queries down below. I do have other Exaktas made by Ihagi to cover on the channel as well. They're quite well regarded cameras, and the lenses in particular are quite well regarded. But this, to me, is not really a true Exakta. Thanks for watching. Like I say, comments, questions, queries, etc. down below. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and all that usual good stuff. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.